Okay, I think we'll get going, guys. You're all very welcome. I think the last few are filtering in. There's great numbers for the webinar today, and apologies we're a couple of minutes late, but we'll try fly through it, and hopefully this adds value for you this afternoon. So, top CV and interview advice and tips is the focus for the next hour. I'm joined by my colleague Stephen McGuire, who's going to jump in the middle for a bit of a reprieve to look at AI and how it impacts both topics. And so I just want to do a quick, kicking off, I just want to do a quick look at the attendees today. I can move these along. There we go. So today's audience is made up of, so about 218 of you signed up. I think it's about 120 or more of you in now. And as I said, you're all very welcome. The average age of the audience today is about 38. So a real mix of ACAs and FCAs. I think 58% of you are in the first 10 years of qualification, with a third of you being FCAs, and then 77% are students. 87% of you are in the Republic, 7% Northern Ireland, and then international, the rest. About 3/4 in business, a quarter roughly in practice, and 5% traveling the world. And 42% male, 58% female. So it's just good for you to know the breakdown of who's kind of attending today and who's looking for CV and interview prep experience or pointers. So immediately, I'm just going to outline what we're going to go through today. So the first half, about 15 minutes, we'll fly through the CV, what it's all about, what it should look like, tips, suggestions, etc., etc. Anything I can add in terms of value for you in that context, because I know you're all pretty much up to speed in terms of CVs, and probably what you're looking for is a little bit of how to enhance that whole piece. Stephen's going to do about 10 minutes on AI and this whole evolving space of CV and your AI and applications particularly. Interviews then we'll do for the last kind of 15-20 minutes and how to approach those, tips, techniques. And again, you know, a lot of you are very professional and you have done loads of interviews and everything. So it's really anything beyond that that I can give you in terms of enhanced interview techniques and how to approach them. So immediately I'm going to go off topic and just get your career development brain going, and mine as well. But just a couple of tips that I always find really useful in terms of career, and if you're looking at stepping into this job search project space and career planning kind of project piece, a couple of things to be really aware of. Your personal brand is something that follows you now for the entirety of your professional career. It's a term you need to be familiar with. You need to know what your personal brand is. You need to build it, guard it, and be visible around this whole piece. It's not an elevator pitch. It's just know what you're reputed for as it follows you. Start linking in with ACA, start building your network. Use LinkedIn to connect with your peers 2 or 3 years ahead of you is a really good tip. Think 2 moves ahead in terms of your job and your career. If you're going to accept a job in the next 6 months, what impact does that have on the next job beyond that? Your career pathway, the career pathway is a hub on Chartered Accountants Ireland, and it's a really good little place to go and have a look at all the skill sets you need to be picking up along your journey in terms of the life cycle of an ACA. Contract options, a lot of you are FCA and might be looking at contract options to kind of change up things a little bit in the year or 2 ahead. Newly quals might be looking at contract options just to tread water and see do they like a particular sector or whatever. And then final tip is the Accountancy Ireland back issues. If you've been head in the books as a newly qual for the last 3.5 years, you probably have a load of Accountancy Ireland back issues that you want to read through and kind of get up to speed on the whole area of chartered accountancy. Early career build considerations. Again, I know I'm getting to the CV topic in a second, but these are good tips, I think, in terms of treating it like a project. Set yourself up a spreadsheet and a career hub, whether it's for your career plan or for your job search project, a spreadsheet, track everything and use it as a hub. Research a multitude of paths that are open to you, particularly if you're in the first 10 years of qualification. Like, keep an eye on all those different paths and those different journeys you can make and directions you can go. Mentors, paramount, really important piece. Have 3 mentors. Speak to them twice a year. That's 6 career conversations every year. where someone's being very honest with you and giving you really good advice. We can go into that in some other webinars. Be deliberate, map it out, build it. The best members, the most successful members of Chartered Accountants Ireland aren't the ones who have come top 10 in their exams, in my experience, over 16 years of recruitment. They're the ones who are constantly tuned into the market, their career plan. They keep their ear to the ground, the grapevine, and they know what's going on, and they're able to pivot and constantly looking to build and keep an eye on things. It's Ireland, build a network from the word go. Whether you're a newly qual or an FCA, you got to focus on that network, and we might touch on that a little bit at some point. And then starting at the beginning of the journey, constantly updating your CV, have a few different versions and so on. So into the CV piece, you can't read this. It'll be in the slides for you to have a look at when you receive them in due course. But it's the job search checklist. So if you are in CV and interview mode and you're going out there looking at the next step in your career path, this is a useful document which will give you kind of a tick box exercise to fly through when you're like asking yourself, am I doing everything versus the market in terms of my job search and interviews and CVs and networking, all those pieces. So I won't dwell on those. So into the CV piece and the purpose of your CV. So as I said, I'll try and make this as useful as possible. Your CV is a sales document, essentially. And when anyone steps into the whole interview and sales application the whole job application piece and stepping into the market, I always say you have to put a little bit of a sales hat on, unfortunately, and kind of know how to sing your own praises, how to put your strengths, your USPs across. And that's what brings us to the CV being basically a sales document. You need to get across your achievements, your value add, what you're bringing to the table. And it's the piece that gets you into the interview. So that's where the achievements piece comes from. You're basically saying, I've done this in this role here, in my previous roles, I've excelled at it, I've been really successful in my journey to date. And that's what I'm bringing to the table for you and for your company or for your organization. And that's what I'm going to add to your team and excel forward with, if that makes sense. It also acts as a document for the interviewer to kind of base their whole interview and discussion and questions from. So it's a base framework for that. So you need to be very familiar with it before you go into an interview, and be able to chronologically step through it, explain it, explain your ambitions, explain why you moved here, what your reasoning was in terms of adding that paragraph to your CV and so on. It cuts through, if you're stepping into a competency-based interview, it actually cuts through a lot of the basic stuff as well. So if they're testing your skill sets and they're asking you about stories and examples and competency-oriented questioning, the CV kind of cuts through all that and it gives you the base. So it's important it's set out well. Chronologically, no gaps, as I mentioned there. So, you might have traveled, put down career break or travel on the CV, and be able to, so your dates should all add up so that there's no gaps basically, and legitimize each piece. If you're taking a career break or taking a time out and you're now a returner, as we'd say, return to work, put that on the CV as well. Some people leave off their personality, their interests, the other piece at the bottom of the CV, which I tend to suggest putting back on because it adds for a warm intro and discussion. When you do meet the person, they realize, oh, you're into GAA or you're marathoning or stamp collecting or whatever. It's good. It's a nice, warm, soft discussion point when you do go for an interview. And all interviews are very different. So we'll see that, like they can be anything from a hotel lobby, coffee chat, or a full grilling in front of a panel on a competency basis. So we'll come to that in a while. One of the best tips I ever heard around CVs, and I've been saying it for many years, is to ask, so when you build your CV, ask yourself, so what, after every line on your CV. So what many people do with their CV is they fall into a trap of listing off their duties and responsibilities without asking themselves, like, how good was I at this? I managed 5 people. but in brackets, they all hated my guts, you know. So you need to give context, show the value add, and the context of your line, basically, if that makes sense. Just ask yourself, so what does this mean? If I'm the interviewer, what's it actually telling me in each case? And as I said, this is the value add you're bringing to the table. Final point, and it's worth a mention in terms of LinkedIn, which is becoming such an essential tool at this point. And FCAs, you know, if you're kind of further on in your career, don't be afraid of it. It's something that you really need to harness. Because the LinkedIn profile, as I describe it, it's literally appendixed onto the back of your CV. It's paper clipped onto your CV. So when someone receives your CV, it's the first place they go straight away. So it needs to be reflective. Now, it's slightly different in that it's forward looking and future thinking, but we'll touch on that as well. This is hard to read. And again, it'll be in the slides when you receive them. On the left is basically an example of a CV template. It's a one page, but you'll flesh it out over 2 pages. It's a good shape in terms of, you know, if you're an FCA, you might want to put the education piece down to the bottom. If you're in the first 10 years, you might want to keep it as is. But that would be a typical shape in this jurisdiction and in the Irish market of what you roughly look at. You'll see there actually, what a lot of people do is they put in the name of the company and then their title and role, and they go into details about the job without putting some context of what the company is about, how big it is, what they do, and stuff like that. So it's worth just remembering that. A lot of people leave that off their CV, and I've got a couple of tips and pitfalls. Actually, I'll go into them in a minute, and then the summary profile, so I'll go into that as well. So tips, pitfalls, suggestions. Again, look, a lot of you will know probably 80% of this, but you might pick up 1 or 2 extra tips. So in Ireland, no photo, no color typically, nice and neat, basic. I tend to leave lines and tables off the CV, use terminology like I drove, I led, ownership, and responsibility. I mentioned about a couple of lines about your current employer, just to give context. If you're in practice, for example, you know, 4-partner practice, 20 employees, and so on, just to give context. Or if it was a PLC, global, the scale, the turnover, that kind of thing. 11 or 12 in terms of text size. Annual review rating is sometimes in past webinars, we've got a question about that. Do I put my annual review rating if I'm in PwC and I get a rating every year? I know it's different now, it's job by job, but you might want to put, you know, a typical kind of annual rating every year of, you know, exceeds expectations or meets expectations or whatever on that. And particularly if it's better than average, it can be a nice little advantage. It's a nod towards your caliber. Naming clients is another question we've got a lot of in the past. And, you know, do I name clients on my CV if I'm a recent qual? To be honest with you, if they're PLCs and they're public, you can name them perfectly comfortably. And it actually sometimes enhances your CV. It looks good if you're working on Greencore, Kerry Group, or whatever. You know, again, it shows the caliber and the weight of client that you've been working with. Other than that, you can describe them in the if you're putting like the types of clients that you've worked with, you know, large food manufacturer or SME in the services space, and give a description, a turnover, an employee size, and maybe the audit type of work you've done with them. So you don't necessarily need to name them. You can describe the sector, the size of company, the type of company, and what they do and stuff like that, and that's sufficient. You can go into it then at an interview in a bit more detail. Also good to have, I mentioned about the CV being a sales document. So, you know, it's a live document. You're going to be adapting this along the way. You're going to be constantly tweaking it, adding to it, you know, and evolving it, basically. And it's worthwhile having a few different versions, particularly if you're still looking at a few different avenues for your career in terms of the direction you want to go. You might be looking at practice and industry and just kind of keeping an open mind on both, for example. So you might have a practice-oriented CV, which focuses much more on, say, you know, your audit work and the practice work and aligning your career direction with practice. Or you might have another CV that's the terminology, the descriptions, the focus and tone of it is much more industry-oriented. Keep it to 2.5 pages length. If you're an FCA with a ton of experience and you're almost C-suite or director level, you might want 3.5 pages. That's perfectly okay. You know, if it warrants it. Typical would be 2.5 pages, being honest. You could do a resume as another add-on, like I mentioned there, resumes, the American version, of 1 page synopsis. It's a nice little exercise to cut your CV down to 1 page, a nice punchy kind of flyer resume style. You know, if you're liaising with someone on the network and you don't want to send them your CV, you can send them, why don't I pop you on a kind of a resume style profile of myself. So a few more pointers. Don't forget to put your academic results on there. Sometimes, even if you're an FCA, if you get really good, like leaving cert points, you know, or graduate level, you know, 1-1 or whatever, get, like, if it's good academic results, make sure you're highlighting them and getting them on there. And keep your bullet points punchy, not too wordy. Cover letter is a little old school. We'll come to the profile summary piece, but I like to do a punchy bulleted profile summary that I send on to clients on behalf of members that I'm applying to roles. You might want to do the same, and we'll see an example of that in a minute. Cover letters are okay, but bear in mind that when your CV is received by a client or a company, they don't have that long to look at it. Like I don't know what the stat is, something like 12-15 seconds. They'll fly through it. They'll go ACA, you know, 3 years qualified. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Tick, 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 tick. And if you've got a profile summary as opposed to a wordy, lengthy cover letter, it can sometimes be much more punchy. If you've got really good written references, and this is a tip I picked up years ago, you know, if you're finding it hard to get interviews off the back of your CV, sometimes if you've got a really nice reference letter, throw it in with your application, really singing your praises as a third party. It can be a nice endorsement and it can get you that interview as well. Make sure we mentioned the interest in the same vein, you know, if you've done charity work, you know, get that detailed on there as well. It shows an extra dimension of your personality, of your work ethic, of, you know, the bigger picture of things. And it you know, if you've written articles, popped up on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. If you're active in the institute committees or anything like that, really good. It shows an extra dimension of you. Spelling is amazing. Like some stat again, 90% of CVs have errors. It's incredible. So triple check, quadruple check your CV and spell check it. How are we going on time? Too bad. Be over to you in a second, Stephen. Focus on getting across your competencies. A lot of interviews, as we said, are competency oriented. So, you know, you'll see that in specs, and get the competencies, your skills, across in terms of the terminology on your CV, and identify your USP. So when you're looking at your personal brand, you know, you'll start honing in on what your USP is, your unique selling point, what differentiates you from the other 10 people lining up for the role you're applying for. So make sure you kind of get that across within your CV in some shape or form. And often at times, actually, the profile piece, little 4-line description at the top of your CV can identify that. You know, if you've got experience very particularly in a certain sector with clients or whatever. I'm just looking at my notes here, and I'm kind of reminding myself that a lot of the so we looked at the audience today, and I think just a quick welcome to all the CPA colleagues who have come over from the CPA Institute as well. And I think a lot are jumping online today on this. And we had a discussion this morning about, like, how do you reflect your CPA switch to ACA qualification? It's only a suggestion. You can do it whatever way you want, really. Like essentially your title, or you're a chartered accountant now, but you might want to put down trained as CPA and qualified as chartered accountant. And Stephen will go into the importance of terminology on that for AI. Any questions on that, you can pop them in the notes and you can pick them up afterwards. System skills, as a footnote, you know, if you've used a plethora of different systems, make sure you get them onto the CV as well. This is the profile summary example. So instead of putting a cover note, or sorry, a cover letter with your application, particularly if you're doing a warm direct application, as I call them, I think sometimes, particularly if you're uploading, you're going to want to bullet point your key strengths and suitabilities for the role. And I think this is a good example of how you might want to put that across. So you can have a scan of that. But I think it's much, if I was sending someone's details across as a member across to a client of mine, this is the type of summary I would send with them, you know. So you can just use that yourself if you like. I mentioned that LinkedIn. So the last point before you switch over to Stephen and go on to interviews then afterwards. The personal branding piece that I mentioned, LinkedIn is a really key tool in relation to that. Make sure you've filled out your profile. Make sure you're using really good keywords indicating the direction you want to go. Get across your key achievements, highlight your qualifications, make sure all your links to ACA, to the Chartered Accountants Ireland are correct on your LinkedIn profile. Invest in a professional photo. John Murray is a fantastic photographer who works very closely with the Institute. And like, again, your CV puts across the right image. LinkedIn does it in a different way. So make sure all the key pieces of your LinkedIn profile are up to speed. Join groups, follow companies, have your top 10 list of companies you really like, follow them, like, share posts, all that stuff at LinkedIn. That's just final on CVs. We're going to do interviews now in a couple of minutes, but I think the world is changing and AI is coming into everything, and Stephen is better on this stuff than me. And he's going to do a couple of minutes quick in terms of CVs and AI and everything you should be vigilant of in that regard. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to AI and your CV, the thing you need to just double check on all the time is that whenever you're applying to roles, if you are applying to a job and when you hit the link to apply, it takes you to an external recruitment service or software like Workday, for example, is a big one. That's routinely going to be auto screened or possibly AI screened. So this is why it is of value. A lot of industry roles now will have this screening element to it to kind of screen out anyone who's not really eligible based on this new technology. So some of the tips for how it works. So basically, AI or auto screening systems, they scan your CV for very specific keywords. So this means that when you're reading through a job description, your CV needs to match the language that the job's written in, that this job posting is in. But it's important not to get too kind of carried away with just copy and pasting the job description into your CV. Now, there's ways around it. So for example, if in the job application, they're looking for financial planning, and in your CV, you've described financial planning, but not used that keyword, a quick tip would be just put financial planning and then a semicolon and then explain the work you did in it. It triggers the keyword in the screening anyway. And you're not like falsifying anything. You're just adding that in to make it easier on this screener to catch it. And this is why using exact terms is really important. So the biggest recommendation I'd make to everyone straight off the bat is on your CV, have your name and then followed by ACA or FCA directly after your name, because this is an immediate keyword. It will appear in the majority of job descriptions in this field. So it's really, really important to have that. And if you have it right after your name, it means further down, if you just have that you're a member of Chartered Accountants Ireland, for example, you don't have to put it again. So that's just a really simple way to do it. Also using abbreviations that are common in the field. So for example, I have here like FP&A, VAT, RCT, things like that. it's really important to have them, because while you might be describing the work as if a human was reading it and you're reading it as a human being and you know what you're referring to, the screening system doesn't. So it's important to have those abbreviations in to ensure that the software catches and you kind of pass through that filtration system. So an AI friendly CV, as was described earlier, needs to be simple. So the CV that we have on the earlier slide, which you can go back and check, just needs to be fairly straightforward. So don't try not to get too creative with fonts, graphics, or in all these layouts. I've seen some CVs where like your academic history is in the left-hand column and then all the work history is in the right-hand column. That's not going to work. Just keep it, layered. So it doesn't really matter what order you put it in. You can have your education first, then your work experience. That's fine. Or you can have it the other way around. It's all fine. The screening will catch what's needed regardless of the order it's in. And that's why it needs to be simple, clean, and easy to scan. So again, when it comes to fonts, stick to very basic fonts like Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman. Really straightforward, really easy. No issue, no potential for errors there. And then another thing that I have seen quite common on some CVs is, particularly if you're discussing your work history with clients, a lot of people use tables, because to a human eye, it's very neat, it's very ordered, it's very simple to read, but to a automated scanner, it can cause a lot of problems. So try avoid using tables where necessary. Now, if you wanted to add a table in, I would recommend just kind of putting it like in as appendix, kind of have it at the end of some clients you worked with. That way the body of your CV is still being screened automatically. And then tips and tricks around this to ensure that your CV gets seen, because a lot of people who are on the webinar right now, your CV will eventually get read by a human, which is where the value really lies, because you could have big names associated with your CV, like you did your training with one of the big four, for example. They're really valuable things to a human eye, so it will get seen by that. So just make sure that everything else is still correct. So your names of your previous employers still on it, even though that's not screened for, the dates you work for them, all the normal stuff keep. You don't have to edit any of that out particularly. And then, if possible, try to quantify your achievements. So this isn't necessarily the case for every achievement you have, but if you are able to put down that you brought in, say, 5 clients that resulted in X amount of revenue, that can be valuable, because there are triggers sometimes in a CV screening, an AI screening, that look for figures, and they highlight those figures for interview purposes. So it's valuable to have that in if you can. And then a big thing that's currently happening, and it's causing problems, is ensure that your CV is saved in both PDF and as a docx. So a docx is just a standard kind of Word document. I know in the past it was always said to put it in a PDF. The issue is that some AI screeners no longer accept PDF as a format. A lot do, some don't. Like Workday, for example, does. No problems with that. But having it in both means you don't need to then kind of panic and have to reformat everything. Have it formatted for both and just have 2 different copies. That one you can send up. It makes it very easy. If you are an Apple fan, I know that there sometimes is issues with their kind of innate system when it comes to uploading. So saving it to a PDF on an Apple is very valuable as well, just because it's more widely accepted and more widely screened. The Apple one, for some strange reason, is causing some problems as we go through. So just to kind of recap very quickly on the AI and the CV screening as we go, and please ask questions in the Q&A and we can answer as we go as well. It's important just to keep your CV clean, neat, and in order. And then do not oversaturate with just copy and pasting from the job description. You can pick up definitive keywords. I always recommend kind of rephrasing the work you've done, because chances are the job you're applying to is something you're currently doing or have done in the past. So the work is there. It's just about making sure that those titles that they're using appear in your CV as naturally as you can make them. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Really, really useful. And I suppose just to make you make sure you don't miss out in terms of applications when being filtered out incorrectly. So really good tips there. Okay, interviews. So we'll fly through this, and the first slide is probably the most important one, really. Hopefully you can see that. And I say to members often, like, we're not an agency here in the careers team in Chartered Accountants Ireland. We have a different kind of take and approach towards the members and really looking after them. And what I say to members every week is, like, if you're working through a recruiter at any point, make sure you're getting really good interview prep for your recruiter if they're putting you forward to a client. Every interview is unique, as I alluded to it yesterday. And just to put a finer point on that, you could be sitting in a hotel lobby having a coffee and a legs crossed and a chit chat about your career, and that's an interview, completely informal, right? That could be an interview style. Another style of interview can be a public sector 4-panel person grilling on a competency basis for an hour, with testing afterwards, and everything in between. So the whole spectrum of interviews, and every single one is different. So as a result, you need to prepare for every single interview. You need to have a 20-30 minute conversation the day before every interview, and it's make or break. It can be, whether you think it or not, you need to draw on the experience of the recruiter or the advisor going in. And what I like to do, and do insist that your recruiter does this as part of the service that they give to you. They want you to win, so they should be doing this for you if they know their client well enough. So, for example, what I do is 4 pillars of preparation for anyone going into an interview for my clients. And I do, part 1 is who, so it's who you're meeting, the style of interview that they're kind of use, their personalities, how long it's going to be, the whole shape, look, and feel of what to expect when you go in the door. Okay. And the track record of how the interviewer comes at that interview. Number 2 then is looking at your CV, making sure you know all your key selling points and what you're bringing across specific to this role. I will have lots of background information in relation to my client. I'll have visited them on site for an hour, or I'll have had a Teams call for an hour with them. I know exactly, I always ask my clients the top 3 things they need to see sitting across the interview table. And I'll be able to arm my candidates with that information specific, so they can sell themselves along those lines and really get the interviewer nodding along. And then we look at dissecting the spec. So a spec will only ever tell you 30% of the reality of a job. The other 70% is made up from the background information and whatever you can ascertain. But you do need to, in a good spec, you need to step down through it very, very particularly with a fine-tooth comb and go, what would I say about each line in this spec? And have an answer or sort of comment or something to say about it. Number 3 then is more about you and what you're bringing to the table, self-SWOT analysis, the stories that you want to get across, the examples that you have in your back pocket, not practiced, not learnt off or anything like that. They're just kind of key pieces of work that you've done, achievements, value add, that you want to get across in some shape or form. Some interviewers are actually quite poor, and it's up to you to use the opportunity to sell your strengths across. Okay, so the best way to do that in any interview, no matter whether it's a chat or whether it's a formal grilling, is to have examples. So if you say, I'm a very good people manager, I'm really good with people, I'm an excellent team leader, and so on, you have to exemplify that. You have to back that up with some kind of story or key piece of work or key example, always. Okay, it's the best way to get across, even if it's an informal chat interview, you always come in with that. Your value add, also weaknesses. So go into any interview, no interviewer should really want someone to tick every single box. You always need to leave a gap in terms of developmental experience, like something new to learn. Every chartered accountant should learn something new going into a new job. So really that's how you approach the weaknesses question. Like, I see you don't have experience in this ERP, but you've used other systems, you're a quick learner, you have a good, always get across the fact that you understand the area or the whatever the relevant weakness is, give a high level understanding from your perspective and say you'd be really keen to learn this new area. And that's the best you can do in terms of a weakness. Insightful questions to make you look good can sometimes be the make or break in terms of interviews. So that's part 4 in terms of my interview prep. And I always come at, so rather than what's in it for me type questions, you're much better off having done your research in the company, the role. You've probably unearthed a really interesting question to put across, or you might ask something along the lines of, you know, after 6 months in this role, like what's the line in the sand in terms of achievement? What makes this a really good success? Like if there were KPIs associated with this job, what are they? You know, show that you're ambitious to succeed in the role. And sometimes it's worth asking a question, even if you know the answer to it, if the question itself makes you look really good. So it looks like you're willing to help, you're keen to add value and so on. Questions along those lines are really good, particularly at first round interviews. So that was an important slide. So the basic stuff, like again, a lot of you will know 80% of this, you know, dress appropriately. When you're meeting with them, I always find when I go for an interview or meet and greet, I like to stand. I have something to say about the company or recent developments or the premises or something nice and warm. You know, you're going to be walking up to the interview and have a kind of an icebreaker or whatever. Your body language is very important. You know, bring your confidence, have a cup of coffee, you know, good solid handshake. Your body language is really important, you know, and so make sure you take a deep breath. Remind yourself, you know, that you're professionally qualified, you're adding huge value to this role, and bring that in with you. Do your research, goes without saying. Yeah, that's obvious stuff. And as I said there, the prep is the differentiator. What do you know about the company, what it does, obvious stuff. Like, I think rather than just looking at the website, I think you need to go beyond that sometimes and Google them, YouTube them, Pinterest them, LinkedIn. Social media is massive now. So company presences and organization presence on social media, what's going on right up to the minute with them. Maybe have a look at their accounts if they're available. We mentioned the interview prep being paramount, personalities of the interviewers, identify the competencies. Some interviews actually, they might be subtly kind of competency oriented, or they might half the interview might be competency oriented, or a CV walkthrough or talk through as well as competency oriented. And they mightn't have competencies listed on the spec, but it'd be up to you to redline the spec yourself and kind of go, right, it looks like communication skills is a really big one here in terms of this spec, or leadership qualities, or, you know, analytical skills. So there'd be 3 examples of competencies, you know, that you can pick out of a spec yourself and go, right, if I had to talk about, you know, my analytical capabilities or my leadership or my team skills or whatever, what do I say about them? So even if it's an informal chat interview, you can bring those competencies into it. Know your key selling points. Make sure you get them in there somewhere along the conversation or the interview. Good example questions and text. Like, you know, I'm talking about in-person interviews, I suppose, largely here. A lot of it's relevant for online Teams and Zoom related interviews. But if it's online, test your technology. I mentioned the body language and the non-verbal rather element. It's just a slide. Again, you can have a look at this in your own time. But it just to, I suppose, reinforce that it's really important how you conduct yourself in person. Like, so much of an interview in person, you get a lot more from in-person interviews. Yourself as an interviewee, as an interviewer, and they're all back now in terms of meeting in person. So important to be vigilant of that. So during the interview, make sure you listen. A lot of interviews start off with the organization telling you a bit about why the role is on board, what it is they're looking for in terms of the role itself. You can kind of take that on board, file it away, use it for questions later on in the interview, or during the interview, even if it's quite interactive. But, you know, the old cliches of good eye contact, look interested, lean forward. Avoid staring at the ceiling, really. That's what you want. Like, I always think that an interview is a little bit like an exam, and we're well used to this as chartered accountants. You know, you're going into a testing situation. What you want to try and do is preempt as much as possible. What types of questions do you think are going to come up? What kind of answers do you think you're going to put forward? You know, I mentioned having stories and examples as a selection in your back pocket, and it's literally that. You're almost going to reach to them as a little story of an example, and you can use them interchangeably to answer a variety of questions to avoid yourself sitting back and kind of going, let me think about that, you know, and staring at the ceiling, which is never ideal in terms of an interview. Okay. Confident, assured, as I mentioned, you know, you're fully qualified ACA, so I suppose be confident in that regard. Stories and examples I mentioned, if it's online, time lag and technology elements, just be vigilant of that. I think I mentioned it here. So I always think of in-person interviews as being three-dimensional and online as two-dimensional. It can be harder to get your personality or energy across online. However, there are certain advantages for first-round interviews online and Teams, for example. You can have your notes beside you, you can have your slippers on, and you can have a cup of coffee beside you, and you can kind of relax you a little bit. So it still stands to have good eye contact and all the rest of it. Get your personality across. I often annoyingly say this to members and candidates when I put them forward and I'm interview prepping them, like, but you know, and I even more annoyingly, I tell them to enjoy the interview process, which, you know, I think it's a good point. You do need to get your personality across. They need to see a bit of you. That's why I like the other interest kind of stuff at the bottom of the CV. You may not want to work for them. Like if the person you're going to be working closely with is interviewing you and you're not really getting that vibe off them, you mightn't want to work for them, you know. So I often say there's an art form to doing your own due diligence in terms of the questions that you ask them about the role of the company, and you know, on a one-to-one, if you want to engage with us, we can assist with that. But the point being, get your personality across. It's really important. Relax, enjoy the interview, and put your best foot forward. Ask insightful questions mentioned. Remuneration might come up first round, second round. Sometimes employers are pretty head on with this stuff, and they say, like, what's your current remuneration, or what are you looking for in terms of remuneration on this? And it's good to just make sure there isn't a bridge too far. And sometimes it's worth meeting that head on. I often say to a candidate or a member, you know, look, it needs to be reflective of the market. This, like, the title, the job, the responsibilities really dictates versus the market and what's being sought in the market for this role. As a 7-year PQE ACA, like, this is my worth generally, having come through, you know, an SMP or a Big Four. And so roughly this is where I'm at in terms of, but it also has to be relative to the team within the company you're joining as well. So it's all relative, but just they may touch on it. Let them know that you're keen on the role at the end of the interview, and just, you know, sometimes it can be worthwhile letting them know that you've got a number of other interviews on maybe at the moment, what your timeline's like. Are you coming up to pressure in terms of accepting certain roles? Is this your preferred opportunity? Let them know that you're very keen on this. Sometimes that fits nicely into the back end of a discussion and an interview. If they're up against the clock and you have an interview, you have an offer, or you're getting an offer and you're going to be under pressure from another recruiter, say, to take it, etc. You know, but this is your preferred opportunity. You need to be transparent and open with them, is often the best approach. So just don't shy away from those things. I think we're coming towards the end now. It might be a minute or two for a few questions, but I just wanted to, I suppose it's a subtle reminder around it being Ireland, networks, people you know, like, it's the old cliche of being really, really important. And it really is the spine of a successful career. I'd love if I was going into an FAE class, you know, and having a quick chat with them before their exams, I'd be saying, like, look, and I say this at the graduate ceremony every year, like, everything starts now in terms of you building a professional career. And the spine of doing that is your networking, you know, so get it going. Networking is such a horrible word in a way, and I prefer to almost call it just chatting constantly about your career. So connect with people, engage with people, always keep the finger on the pulse and chat with people constantly about your career, and be interested in developing your career path. Don't just flop from one job to the next. Own it and grow it and take responsibility for it is just a little bit of a message here now for Chartered Accountants Ireland. We're the biggest professional body on the island, as you're constantly being reminded, so there's great prowess to it, and you have an opportunity now to, put in some great CVs, interviews, and build a fantastic professional career. And there's some examples there on how you build your network. And don't shy away from LinkedIn FCAs, as mentioned, and get involved in the Institute. It's so easy to kind of drift away from the Institute, but it's a massive resource. It's a huge opportunity for you to boost your personal brand, your profile, your visibility. So get involved in committees, events, young professionals, the interim managers group, whatever. There's like dozens and dozens of committees and groups for you to get involved with there. So finally, quick wrap up. Just have a variety of versions for your CV, maybe. Be able to get across and sell your strengths in relation to interviews. Know your key achievements and your USPs and your personal brand and all that stuff. If you end up talking to me at some point in the next, or Stephen, in the next few months, I'll talk about the job search project and you stepping into the market looking for a new job. And that's the short-term career management piece. But you need to have an overarching career plan project, which is the long-term career management. You need to have a vision and a guiding light for where you're taking this professional qualification. We can look at that as well. So be interview ready, get your mentors on board. We're here to assist with you, the Institute Careers team. We cover all these elements here, and we'd love to hear from you as a member of the Institute. And final points really is like the key elements in relation to CV and interview. Actually, we'll review your CV for you if you like, and send it on to us, and we'll take a look at it and help you reshape or reterm things. So as a sub-paying member of the Institute, that's a service that is available to you every year. And also we do interview prep. So if you're applying directly for opportunities, we will do a 20-30 minute interview prep along those 4 pillars that I mentioned with you, and delighted to do so. So that's it, guys. Hopefully useful, hopefully some things you didn't know or value add in there. And thanks so much for engaging with us today. We'll probably look at, see, is there a few questions there? Did you notice any?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 big questions. So one is, should you include non-Irish qualifications on your CV? And kind of linked to that as well, how do I best present overseas experience on the CV?
Yeah, so absolutely. You put down all your educational details on your CV, no matter where, and you put down good detail on that. I think I see, Yasir, you mentioned your ICMA, Pakistan, etc. Absolutely. Put all that detail down there. If it's chartered accountants and it's part of the One World alignment, there's a whole chartered accountants family there as well. But yeah, absolutely. You put down all your international qualifications. How do I best present overseas experience to show local relevance to Irish employers? By the same token, international experience is really valuable. And I think that Irish employers do acknowledge international experience. It's more of a worldly approach. We're a small open economy. If there's ACAs coming back from Australia, Canada, Middle East, or wherever, they love that kind of maturity that international experience brings. There's a diversity coming into the workplace in Ireland that is highly valued as well. So yeah, I think get across all dimensions like that. Yeah, really valuable.
And then one of the kind of only other questions is simply just any skills worth acquiring at the moment. I think it's okay on this. I think a big one that's currently, it's still growing and I can't really see it ever slowing down, is data style skills. So like data analytics and things like that, simply because it just seems to be kind of the way the shift is moving. And having that kind of feather in your bow is valuable. So I think at the moment, database skills are really well sought after and will open quite a few doors and everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more of a convergence now more than ever between technology and finance. And we're seeing that in chartered accountants, like becoming more and more business leaders. Um, Look, we're stepping into a world where AI is probably going to take over more of the nitty gritty. And that's where chartered accountants are becoming business leaders. They're becoming more strategic. They're more business decision makers and leaders. I would say focus in on the soft skills. If you have a look at the career pathway hub on Chartered Accountants Ireland, as was alluded to in the presentation, you'll see the 4-step life cycle to a chartered accountant, and it's a little generic, but it shows you all the skill sets that you might want to pick up along the way. And it's really useful in terms of planning your career and realizing that, after a few years PQE, it's all about how you hone your leadership, your communication, your business acumen, your analytical capabilities. That's what starts coming into interviews, and what you need to start reflecting on your CV, perhaps, and systems experience, etc., depending on what direction or what path you take in terms of the journey. So that's it, guys. And I think that there's no more questions. So
sorry, just one more. So one is, if you plan to switch jobs in the next year, when should you start your search and applications?
It's a good question. That's probably related to summer, I suppose. Like, we're not like, I mean, I'd be hesitant to say that things slow during the summer because it's still busy. The market's quite good at the moment. The jobs will be there. Now, they might be a little slower in terms of the process because people are away on holidays and that kind of thing, but stick with it. Typically, Q4, September onwards, the start of September is when things kick up a gear. A lot of recruiters would say that to you. That's when you find there's a bit more activity. But I'd start as soon as you're ready. To be perfectly honest, you don't wait for a busy time in the market or season. Start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. And that's the last one.
Great, guys. Look, thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to chatting to you in person in here in the institute. If you want to call into us, if you want to do a Teams call, schedule with myself or Stephen at any stage, FCA or ACA or CPA, etc. Delighted to have a chat at any stage. And whether you're looking at a new job in the market where we can place you, or whether you're just looking for a little bit of career chat and perspective, get in touch with us at any stage. We're here for you.
Absolutely.
Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.